Hi, everybody. Let's see. So, yes, I'll be talking about transcranial electrical stimulation, and you'll be getting a clinician's perspective. So let's dig right into it. So talking about tDCS, direct current stimulation is basically hooking up a battery to your head. Okay, so where you place the positive electrode, also called the anode, and you place the negative electrode in another place on the brain, and the current flows from the positive to the negative through a wide area of the brain, affecting brain activity in those areas. However, it's not recommended that you hook up a battery to the brain for several reasons. And that is that we want to really limit the current. That's one reason. The current is highly limited to about 2.5 milliamperes per 25 centimeters squared, of that order. And we use a constant current circuit, so we know how much current is going through the brain at any time. So how does tDCS work? Well, the current is very, very low, so it does not directly cause neuron firing. However, the electric field produced and the movement of electrons produced by the direct current stimulation affects the membrane potential of neurons. So here you have a picture of a neuron with the positive charge on the outside and the negative charge on the inside. That's called the membrane potential. And when this membrane potential rises to a certain threshold, then there's a short circuit, and the neuron fires. And in that firing, it transmits current and information through the synapse to the next neuron. So when you apply an electric field across the membrane, then you influence that firing. So we have the resting membrane potential is affected, and what we are doing is affecting the potential for neurons to fire, positively or negatively. Now, even by itself, that may not be such a big deal, but it so happens that as neuronal circuits fire repetitively, they adapt. So neurons that fire together, wire together, as we say colloquially. And so what you're doing is priming the pump and affecting that potential for firing, and in this way affecting the plasticity in the brain. So tDCS really gets its power from influencing the synaptic plasticity in the brain. All right, so how it works is if we determine an area of the brain that's associated with a certain task performance that is done well, expert task performance, then we can use say, an electrode connected to that area while performing the task. So then as the neuron circuits fire while performing the task, they're going to be influenced by the electrode. So here we have a fMRI of task performance of a target detection task for Air Force pilots trying to do threat detection. And so you have the fMRI of a novice and of experts, averaged. And we try to determine the difference. So the red arrows point to areas which light up in experts, but not in novices, and presumably are highly involved in the performance of that threat detection task. So if you stimulate those areas, we expect better learning performance. And in fact, the Air Force discovered that they could cut the training time of drone pilots in half by stimulating those areas. So we're talking about accelerated learning because tDCS amplifies brain activity. And white matter changes have been detected in the brain in response to direct current stimulation. So white matter is like the wiring of the brain. And one popular placement has been placing the positive electrode, the anode, on the right temple for improving learning, as discovered by Dr. Vince Black. And so here we have an image of a new scientist writer, Sally Eddy, learning to fire a rifle with the positive electrode stimulating the right temple. And what she writes in her blog is that when she was first learning the task, it was really hard. She's never fired a weapon before. And then her mind was really in the way, saying, oh, this is too hard, I can't do this, I'll never get it. And then as soon as the current was turned on, that critical inner dialogue disappeared for her. And the mind was just clear and energized, and she could focus and performed much better. Not only that, she was surprised to find that her mind stayed clear for the next 3 days. So she was quite eager to go and find her own device. So another really successful area for direct current stimulation is the treatment of depression. So I've listed several multi-centered studies, but the basic placement for depression is the anode or the positive electrode on the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex area and the negative electrode on the right supraorbital area. This is something I use routinely in my private practice with people. And I'll just tell you a little anecdote. I've been initiating a program of adding direct current stimulation to eating disorder facility, which I consult with, along with neurofeedback and other therapies. And so I was working with a young woman last week with depression, and I hooked her up and chatted with her. And after about 15 minutes, I asked her if she was feeling any change, because sometimes people start feeling more positive even in 15 minutes. And she said, no, she wasn't feeling anything. And so then I had to think about times in her life when she felt more joy. And she did that, and within a minute, she was lit up. She just lit up like a switch had been turned on. And she stayed that way for the rest of the day. So again, those endogenous circuits for joy had to be activated, and they got immediately amplified by the direct current stimulation. And typically, of course, in her case, there's other therapies we'll do and also repeat this process. All right, so normally we'll combining tDCS with therapy and other tasks will do the job for us. So there have been many tDCS studies, and they're ever increasing. So tDCS has shown benefits for improved mood, reducing pain, stroke recovery, improved motor function, accelerated learning of different kinds, improved attention and memory, and so on. So because of this, and because of the ease of use and relative safety, there's a huge consumer movement of using tDCS. The units are mobile, they're cheap, you can use them while doing other things, and if the units do what they say they do, then the currents are limited, and some of the actual dangers are skin tingling, irritation, and you can burn the skin if it's not prepared properly. Now the other thing is that you can actually have a number of negative side effects. If you just strap on an electrode and try it, you could have a negative effect. It won't last. It'll go away in a few hours. However, there's a trade-off in trying to use this without enough education and supervision. For example, the website foc.us, which promotes tDCS consumer use and have some great devices. So they've been producing this baseball cap, which you can use to stimulate your brain while playing sports. And they say on their website that they have studies show that if you stimulate the left prefrontal cortex, then you have a different relationship to pain, and you can push further and go longer, which may or may not be a good thing, right? It depends. And in fact, a small percentage of people who get stimulation on the left side of the brain will go into a hypomanic state for a while. And this is a known side effect of all antidepressants. But basically, the idea is that the positive effect is related to activation of the left prefrontal cortex in many people. And if you're already overactive in that area for whatever reason, you have overactivity, too much thinking, and if you have sleep issues and then you activate it further, that's going to be highly unbalancing for you. So these things have to be individualized. So there's talk of legislation, and my personal opinion is education rather than legislation. It's just like exercising. Exercising is really good for you, but if you do it the wrong way for a long time, you can really hurt yourself. So some supervision and education is necessary. Okay. So I want to talk about some frontline clinical work that us neurofeedback clinicians do with tDCS in individualizing treatment, which really improves the safety and the efficacy of using tDCS. So I very rarely put tDCS electrodes in people's heads without doing some evaluation. So what we do is we have taken intake history, a 19-channel EEG recording, and then we can analyze this data, compare with a database of normals, so-called normals, to get averages, to look at what a quantitative EEG, to look at what is the activity of that person's brain compared with the norm. So one of the things that is output in the QEEG is these power maps. So we have a power distribution of different frequency bands across the head. And basically the key here is that the red and the yellow is pointing to areas that have abnormally high power relative to the average. So this is a person that came to me complaining of an anxiety-based disorder, OCD. And the first thing we want to do is correlate their symptoms with the QEEG abnormality. And we know from clinical experience that this kind of overactivity in the center of the head and center of the brain is generally an overactivity of the cingulate, which can appear centrally, it can appear frontally or parietally, and is often correlated with OCD. So it tells us, okay, so this is a signal that we can train down in neurofeedback or apply stimulation. And what we would do here is place the negative electrode on top of the vertex of the head at that hot spot, and the positive electrode at the base of the neck. And when I did that with this person, they experienced deep calming. And we also continued with other therapy and meditation. So here's another example of a person complaining of focus issues. And we see from their brain map that there is a couple of areas of very low power. That's what the blue indicates. And especially we picked the spot on the left side centrally. And we already know from our clinical experience and research that that area of the brain is highly task connected to focusing. So that lets us know that we could place the positive electrode on that left sensory motor strip and the negative electrode on the right shoulder. And so this person came and they were talking to me and feeling kind of spaced out and unclear, and I placed the electrodes, and after 15 minutes, their head was clear. Okay? So it can have strong effects. So normally we would do combined tDCS with neurofeedback and other tasks, and I think I already mentioned we can use neurofeedback along with it, and I often, once I see the placement works for someone, I will give them a unit to use at home, and then we continue with neurofeedback in the office. All right, so that's talking about tDCS and its uses. Let me talk about transcranial alternating current stimulation. And here the difference is that the current is alternating instead of direct. It's not just going from the positive to the negative, but it's going back and forth. So if you apply an alternating current of 10 cycles a second, it goes rapidly back and forth across the electrodes 10 times a second. And this kind of switching can happen in a gradual way, as in a sinusoidal application. It can happen abruptly, as in a square wave or a pulse application, or it can happen in just about any waveform you can think of. Sawtooth and any waveform that you can come up with. So again, this is not the same as hooking your brain up to the mains. Why is that? Because the current is highly limited. It's very low current, and it's not going to injure brain tissue or your vital organs. Okay, so we have an infinite parameter space, literally, for transcranial alternating current stimulation, because the location can vary, on the head, and we can even use the neck, spine, and body, but that's for a whole different, that's not really the topic of this talk, but that has very interesting results. We can all change the frequency, so the question is what frequency should be used for this person, and where should we use the electrodes, and what waveform should we use? So there's a lot of questions, and the research is very limited. So some history, Russians were playing around with alternating current stimulation in the 80s, and they came up with this Limoges and Lebedev montage and current for electroanesthesia. It was highly successful. You could hook people up in surgery with one electrode on the forehead and two behind the ears. And I won't say much more about it. Certainly, cranial nerve were involved and also stimulated by the current, and generally are when you're doing current stimulation. The vagal nerve, trigeminal nerve, different nerves are affected as well. And currently, an excellent device is available that uses that principle for treating depression, anxiety, and insomnia. There's consumer tACS devices, Fisher-Wallace, Alpha Stim, Mind Alive, Think. And I have some of them. I use them in my practice, and they're supposed to help depression, anxiety, insomnia, pain. But my experience is that their effect is simply not as clear as tDCS is. It's simply not as clear as it could be. So why is that? And the answer that I think needs to be given is that they do not use sinusoidal tDCS. They use all pulse tDCS. And when you use a pulsed waveform, it's just not clear to the brain what to do with it for many reasons. So if you use a sinusoidal waveform and say you stimulate the brain at 10 cycles a second, the question is, does that increase the power at 10 cycles a second in the brain? Does it entrain the brain? And the answer is yes, if you're using sinusoidal waveforms, not if you're using square wave waveforms. So in fact, research is showing that sinusoidal stimulation at a frequency band increases the power in that frequency band. So there's some research on that, and a couple of papers on that. One interesting paper that used sinusoidal stimulation to use a noise canceling idea to cancel Parkinsonian tremors. So just as we have your noise canceling headphones that I use in my plane, in my flight here, the idea was to try to pick up the signal of the tremors of Parkinson's patients, to filter that signal, and to feed it in phase reversed form to the brain, canceling out the signal in the brain that produces the tremors. And they had 50% success. So that's clear demonstration that sinusoidal tACS does something useful and does what we think we believe it does. Okay. All right, so I want to talk about some frontline clinical work that we're doing on meditation and self-regulation using sinusoidal tACS. And here's the basic idea. We have a Tuneup protocol. And what that does is we stimulate the brain starting at a very low frequency and then stimulate up the frequency band, stopping at a very high frequency. So that's the basic plan. And what we find is that when we do that, here's an example. So we might start at 0.1, go to 1, 2, 4, 8, 10, 14, 16, 32, 40, 70. And actually, currently, we're using a wide range from 0.01 hertz, ultra low, like Siegfried was talking about, to ultra high, 528. And one caveat is that the low frequency training has to be 2 to 5 times longer than the high frequency training. So we're stimulating the low frequencies much more than the high. And what do we find? That we create a very high performance state with a high degree of mindfulness. So in 15, 20 minutes. So if I told you in 15, 20 minutes I can put you in a high mindfulness, high performance state, would you let me hook you up to some current? So then the question is, how and why would this work? And this actually brings us back to what what the last three people were talking about so eloquently, that different frequencies have different effects, right? So in general, we can think of arousal increasing with frequency. The low frequencies have low arousal, the high frequencies have high arousal. So when the brain is producing more power in a low frequency, the focus is internal, the energy is low, body awareness is high, the state is relaxed. And when the stimulation is at a high frequency or the power is at a high frequency, then the attention is externalized and the energy is high and the body awareness is low. And emotionally, you can have be peaceful or sad at a low frequency, or have trauma come up at a low frequency, and at a high frequency you can be joyful or very agitated. So our rationale is that we want to increase the depth and the availability and the flexibility of people. So you can think of each frequency as indexing a different state of mind and body. So when you go through a bunch of frequencies, what you're doing is increasing access to those mind states, you're increasing the flexibility of switching states, and you're increasing the range of what's available to the person. So this is, again, very similar to what Judith was talking about with the meditation, the brain mirror. There's a base of access to delta and even lower, ultra-low frequencies on which rests the activation of the high frequencies, and both are needed. So this goes along with a mechanism in the brain called cross-frequency coupling, in which the high frequencies ride on the low frequencies in synchrony. I won't go into that more detail yet today. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the basis of it. Why it would produce a high mindfulness state. So we use mindfulness ideas. The ideas, we talk about mindfulness, but what is mindfulness really? It's never that clear. So one way to think about it is, if you look at the 7 factors of enlightenment in Buddhism, and those factors are, so what the Buddha came up with is that for a practitioner to really get enlightened, to understand the nature of suffering and reality, they have to develop relaxation, energy, concentration, joy, equanimity, investigation, and mindfulness. Now this list makes more sense if we put it like this. So we have 3 calming factors on one side and 3 activating factors on the other. So there's tranquility versus energy, equanimity versus joy, and concentration versus inquiry. So if you're meditating, you start to get deeply relaxed. But if you don't have enough energy, you'll fall asleep and get dull. Now, after some time in meditation, great joy will arise. And if you get lost in the joy, you lose focus. You have to have equanimity to maintain your state of mind and focus. As you deepen in then you will deepen in concentration. But just concentrating mindlessly is not the purpose of Buddhism or of any genuine task. You use the concentration as a lens to truly inquire into some question or for a creative purpose. In Buddhism, that would be inquiring into the nature of self. So you have to have that attitude of inquiry. So what we have is, again, is a sense of balancing opposites, that all these elements need to be present in a highly awakened state. So that's the idea behind the Tuneup protocol, is to give you access to a wide range of states that are then more and more available to you simultaneously, and then the actual formula that you need depends on the state you're in, depends on the call of need of the moment. If you need to just relax, you can do that more. If you need to activate, you can do that more on that base of relaxation, and be in whatever combination you need to be in. So it's like every state is a combination of frequencies, and they become more available to you. All right, so we have also expanded the Tuneup to cover the ultra-low range. That is the training in the Signet system that Siegfried was talking about, that we find is extremely helpful in helping a person to self-regulate and manage their energy. And it helps in trauma resolution and also the high frequency ranges. So basically what Judith Pennington was talking about is being in this highly awakened states, having insight, trauma resolution, and I think I should hire her as a PR person. That's the kind of thing that this also produces and has a similar principle. You can also use different locations, and including the spine, that has very interesting results, which I won't go into. So that's our preliminary results. Initially, you can get strong effects of energy release, and vivid dreams, memories, and over time, an emerging sense of balance, less reactivity, reduced anxiety, improved functioning in daily life, and greater insight into therapeutic issues. Of course, we're doing this in the clinic, so if there's side effects, we can deal with them, but they're actually very, very low. The percentage of side effects is extremely low. Most people have a really positive response because of the natural balancing effect of the protocol. And we combine this with other psycho-spiritual interventions. So we started a preliminary study where we're going to do 10 sessions without any other interventions, do pre and post evaluation, and just see what results we get with some pre-screening. And we've only done 2 or 3 people so far, but it looks good, and I'm open to other collaborations that we might be doing on this. And another fun study would be to do a statistical correlation of objective frequencies with subjective reports. Because clearly we already know a lot about it, and actually doing some studies to try to quantify this would be extremely useful. So there's other forms of stimulation that are available in my clinic. I use the Neurofield equipment. I think Nick Dogris, the owner of Neurofield, is here, and he's done a brilliant job of creating equipment that we can innovate on. And he's just added random noise stimulation, and Neurofield offers pulse electromagnetic field stimulation. And I've also just bought a bunch of helmets from Biotech company. And so, because we've been looking at near-infrared stimulation in our practice already, and we started adding that a few weeks ago. And so there's a lot of fun options available for people to come to our clinic. The question is what to do when, and that's an ongoing inquiry. All right, so certainly observing your EEG activity in any way is a form of self-awareness, of mindfulness. And what we're looking at in various ways is closing that loop where you can observe as well as get stimulated in some way and create this highly effective, powerful closed loop system. Thank you.